Oh, let's do this. This is easy. This is easy. I like
Kizaru is here, and there. In fact, we have a whole army of, Kizaru for Luffy to deal with, and so now we can finally answer the hypothetical question of who would win, one Emperor or 100 Marine Admirals. Oh, and also one of the 5 Elders is about to make a big move. Is that big move to transform into his Shadow Beast and take command of Egghead Island? Or is that big move to go and relieve himself, as the elderly must do every half hour or so? That right there is the beauty of One Piece. At this stage in the series, each and every panel holds an entire multiverse of potential. We could be about to see the most epic thing in the series to date, or we could see an old man relieving himself.
Which we've seen. We know he's tough old man. Okay, let's get to it.
I don't know about you, but I say let's roll the dice. Or maybe spinning the roulette wheel would be a better way to start, because one of my favorite parts of this chapter was Luffy spinning Kizaru. It was a really trippy series of panels, or I guess just one panel in particular. I don't think I ever expected to see this sort of art of Kizaru, because he's not making any sort of facial reaction, but he is still clearly undergoing shenaniganry unbefitting of a man in his position. It also gives us another direct comparison to Kaido though, because Gear 5th Luffy seems to have the same opening moveset. It goes 1, become big, like really big, 2, grab opponents, and 3, spin the crap out of said opponents. The thing is, Kizaru might be proving his confidence here because he seems to be taking this a lot better than Kaido did. By this time, Kaido had already eye-popped. In fact, he'd eye-popped twice. He did a double popper. But Kizaru, he has yet to succumb to the duress of the tune.
That's because this nigga smoke cigarettes and chill.
Powers. And right now,
this nigga be chilling with his life a little too extra hard. I be like, nigga, stop chilling, bro. You better fight, nigga. He be, well, this sucks, but I guess I gotta do this. Like, this nigga is literally the embodiment of Elvis if this nigga was here right now.
it doesn't feel like Luffy.
Even though I don't know if that's true.
His devil fruit is affecting him at all. What I see with Kizaru is an adult entertaining a child. Whereas with Kaido, it was like an older brother getting far too invested in the game of his younger brother. But 2 things come to mind about Kizaru's mind. One is that he may have incredible mental fortitude. He's seen so much happen in this world that not even a giant toonman can prompt a reaction out of him. That, or he's just completely empty in the old mind brain and just doesn't have the infrastructure in place to produce emotional expressions. And whether he intended to do this or not, Luffy throwing Kizaru into the water was pretty cool. I'm always happy when water becomes part of the fight battling equation again, given that it's, the primary weakness of devil fruit users. And it's so weird that we almost never see water come into play. But I guess that's because, despite the fact that this is a pirate manga, 95% of that pirate manga takes place on large stretches of land. But this has also led to one of the most creative uses of a devil fruit I think we've ever seen in the series, and also one of the smartest when it comes to turning crisis into opportunity. Crisis, I guess, is a bit of a strong word considering Kizaru's reaction to the situation, which can be summed up as, He's flying away quite frankly, looking bored. And it's another one of those moments where no one can really give Kizaru credit for being a quick thinker, because he really does take his sweet time coming up with a solution to not drown to death. In fact, he even takes his sweet time coming to the realization that he's about to hit the water. And I thought something very clever might happen here, because there's a panel where Kizaru catches sight of the reflections of light on the water, and in that moment I was like, he's gonna use those reflections to bounce straight back at Luffy. This is clever. I like this. But then he just, did the same sparkly thing that he always does. I really don't think I'm selling the cool and creative use of this devil fruit that I originally claimed. But what it turned...
Oh shit, that could have been cool if this nigga did use his reflection. That would have been dumb. This gotta go in the tube. Cause nigga, if he had used his reflection, niggas would have been mad. How did he do it?
Into is pretty amazing, because it morphs into this ridiculous spectacle fight of Luffy taking on roughly a gazillion Kizaru. And something interesting that Luffy does say is that it's like fighting against the holograms, which brings up a hypothetical. If you had the photon gloves and Kizaru made these clones, could you hit them with the gloves? And if so, would Kizaru actually take damage from the hit? It's a tricky question because Luffy eventually does use Haki to defeat all of the light clones, but it goes through all of them. It doesn't solidify the Logia powers as Haki is supposed to, which I suppose just indicates that these clones are not part of the true body of Kizaru, because that's what Haki does. It lets you touch the true body of the fruit user. But also, that essentially makes the light clones immune to Haki. However, despite that, they are still able to hurt Luffy, because one of the swords scratches him. So these things are dangerous. Much more dangerous than Luffy made them look. So I wonder if dealing with the clones is what could lead us to finally getting Chekhov's photon gloves onto someone. And I love Luffy's reaction to the clones, because really, just imagine that you're a pirate in this universe. You see this, you would be shitting yourself. Because instead of facing one admiral, one is bad enough, you are now facing like tens of admirals, hundreds maybe, you don't know. Because as far as you can see, everything the light touches is admiral, including the light. And Kizaru is not the first character in the One Piece universe to figure out how to clone themselves using magical fruit powers. However, I think, and I'm not sure about this, but I think he might be the first Logia fruit user to do so. We know that, say, for example, Robin can clone herself because the Hana Hana no Mi creates body parts. So you just recreate a whole human body. It's very much cloning in its purest and most physically accurate sense. And Doflamingo could do it, although his method is a bit more questionable. He makes a string clone, which he can then perfectly realistically color using more colored string. But honestly,
that shit don't really make sense, I'm be honest. Don't make no goddamn sense. The fuck does that mean?
Doflamingo's powers have always been just a little bit ridiculous, but here's my rationalization. He's an awakened user of strings, and thus he can manipulate the narrative threads to suit the needs of the story, even if they do, ironically, create loose ends. But the OG of cloning powers was Galdino's wax, and this was back in the day when Oda tried to explain all of the cool things it is he wanted to do. So in this case, Galdino had Miss Golden Week paint his copies. Otherwise, they were just flat white wax. In any case, clones aren't new, but this is probably my favorite application of them in One Piece so far. Although it was pretty funny when Luffy just defeated them all in one go, because this is an admiral, and how it looks on paper is that Luffy just bodied 20 admirals in one go, because they were all conveniently lined up to be brought down by a single strike. And I guess, can we just say that in fiction, clones are almost never used well. It reminds me a lot of Dragon Ball, when characters would, for some reason, use the multiform technique, and then they would somehow expect it to actually do something beneficial.
It's never done.
Although I guess Naruto found a ton of great ways to use clones, more so as strategic tools, which is what Kizaru was doing here. It's forgivable because, one, it's a fictional pirate comic and it's meant to be goofy, but also it's forgivable because these aren't shadow clones. They're not capable of complex commands. What Kizaru essentially did was the equivalent of select all, and then right-clicked on Luffy to tell them to attack. At that point, Magical Fruit AI takes over, so they all move with very predictable pathing. But all in all, it was very impressive because it keeps both Luffy and Kizaru somewhat on the same plane, if not elevating Kizaru just slightly more. Because really, the whole event emphasizes that Luffy is now fighting against someone whose motivation isn't necessarily to fight back. Kizaru has made it very clear that there is a mission to be completed here, and whether he beats Luffy or not is irrelevant. In fact, engaging with Luffy is a waste of time. Unlike Kaido, whose goal was to win the fight battle, but to do so through raw dominance. This was his goal to a fault, and he did, arguably, cause his own defeat. But really, this is a bit of a wake-up call for Luffy. His brute toon force works better against some opponents than it does others, and there's still a lot of room to grow. I can't help but be reminded of Marineford when I'm reading this though. Luffy is now fighting on the level that those around him were fighting at during the Paramount War. He isn't just some rookie who somehow stumbled onto the stage, because all it took back then was one kick from Kizaru to pack Luffy up. And it makes me feel very proud of my rubber captain, because I remember this panel and how impossibly out of reach these three opponents felt to Luffy back then. And yeah, it took a long time to get here, but at the moment, two of these characters are already in Luffy's rearview mirror, with the third looking shockingly possible as well. And then elsewhere, we have Zoro versus Lucci, which is a completely opposite kind of fight to Kizaru and Luffy. Those two are all sorts of, wacky powers colliding, whereas here we see two very traditional martial arts clashing, just with a dash of leopard added to the mix for that One Piece flavor. It's nice to see awakened Lucci again, and the only word I have is respect. Respect to Lucci for respecting Zoro enough to slip straight into Leopard God mode, because he's gonna need it. And Zoro's going in pretty heavy as well. You can see some black lightning coming off the swords and also the sort of haki flames that coat them. So this is Zoro in Kingslayer mode. And it's potentially concerning because that does put Zoro on a clock. When he first used this ability against King, he said, "How should I stabilize my haki then? If I have to keep exuding it at this level, it'll kill me." But no, that's perfect. And as far as we know, this perfection is still the case, so Zoro can't do this for long. But also, how long does he really need? To Zoro, this is just another exhibit at the combat zoo. And I do feel a bit bad for Zoro because ever since Pika, he has done nothing but fight animals. For the most part though, Zoro and Lucci are just smack talking one another, which means that for either Zoro or Lucci, one of them is going to be subject to the classic, well, that didn't age well, depending on who wins. I will say it would be the ultimate insult for Lucci to lose at this point, because not only could he not beat Luffy, he's not even worthy of taking on Luffy anymore. Actually, you know what? It's already a bit of a defeat for Lucci, because earlier on in the arc he said that he wouldn't recognize Luffy as an emperor. But now, contradiction, here he is recognizing Zoro as the second in command of an emperor. So I dare say that Rob Lucci has already lost the mental battle.
Bro, he ain't shit, nigga. That little Target bitch ass nigga. Fuck that nigga. We got Luffy in this bitch.
And look, I don't use this term lightly, but I think that Rob Lucci has fallen off. He was once considered one of the great ultimate villains of the One Piece world, and now he's so desperate for relevance again that he's trying to restart old beef against the Straw Hats and leeching off the clout of Kizaru. It's, well, it's just sad to see, really. Like Kaku, who wasn't even in the chapter, which in his case was sad not to see. I guess he's still stuck in a bubble somewhere, but since everyone left the control room, I have no idea what they did with him, if anything. Speaking of bubbles, the Vega tank is such a cool vehicle. It looks like a combination of 3 different technologies. The body is made from a bubble, which contains metal components required to do all of the vroom vroom commands, and then it appears to have wheels or maybe tires or maybe both that are made of clouds, which are really cool because they seem to warp and distort quite a bit. It's a really great fusion of fictional ideas, 2 ridiculous fantasies being used in a scientific way. And it's stuff like this that makes One Piece feel like a living, breathing world. And I'm also just really glad that even at this late stage, we're still getting to see new devices. The one unfortunate thing about Egghead is that the pacing is so tight that I feel like Oda didn't get enough time in the playground to explore a lot of these fun future ideas that he won't have an excuse to draw in future arcs. I think that wanting more is almost always a good criticism though, unless it's something like, say, wanting more of Kaido's backstory or wanting a backstory. Although I will say, the anime episode recently, I think they did a much better job with that than the manga did. But one last note before we move on, I also like that older man Vegapunk puts on goggles to drive his tank.
Looking for last-minute gifts? Shop the best gifts under $50 this holiday on Uber Eats.
Sort of like in the ye olde days when you had to wear driving goggles because cars weren't enclosed. Let's be real though, drawing cool technology was a mere sub-goal of Oda's time with Egghead Island, because I was made aware of something very recently. And now as a result, I am very hyper-aware of when it happens. And in this case, that happening is Nami's butt. So there's this very cool wide shot of giant Luffy holding Kizaru, with everyone looking on, and Oda has made sure to leave just enough room in the panel for Nami's butt. And you might think, why are you pointing this out, you perverted man on the internet? It's because there's a reason for this. It's because, and I mean this in all seriousness, it's because drawing butt specifically has been one of Oda's big Egghead goals. In the most recent SBS, Eiichiro Oda said the following: "For the arc of Egghead, I wanted to show a completely different design from modern design, and I used clothes that clearly revealed the buttocks. However, I realized that since I had never drawn panties before, I was known to be unable to draw buttocks."
I ain't gonna lie, I was about to say that's a shitty ass drawing, bro. That's funny as hell though. So I specifically studied the method of drawing erotic buttocks and gradually became good at I ain't gonna lie, I don't think it's that good still, Oda.
Drawing buttocks. That's the sort of insightful gold that you're missing if you don't read the volumes. But, and that's a very appropriate conjunction, it would seem that Egghead Island is a bit of an artistic study for Oda. Sort of like how Monet painted haystacks at different times of day to see the effect that light would have. It's like that, except Eiichiro Oda draws butts at different times of day and at a rather wide variety of different angles. So that's why you get panels like this. Note that every male character has their posterior off panel or covered by a speech bubble, but we have made space for Nami and Robin, because that's the study. This right here is what Egghead Island is all about. And you know, Eiichiro Oda might not have been wrong to question his abilities or previous
He just trying to make his character some little thick shit, I get it.
Slack thereof, because I found a thread from the worst Gen 4.
That sounds crazy as hell, but I feel him though.
In 2019 titled, "Why is Oda so ass at drawing ass?" So my conclusion is that Eiichiro Oda saw this and he said to himself, constructive criticism accepted, and hence why Nami, Robin, and Bonnie are all in panties. With Bonnie though, it looks like our Kuma idea was right, just substitute Kuma for Sentomaru. He's the one who saved Bonnie from getting hit when she crossed the Frontier Dome, and we were given a pretty epic shot of our guy Sentomaru here. And it reminds me of some of the greatest One Piece panels. Stuff like Whitebeard dying while standing, and even more so Zora's nothing happened moment. So what I'm going to do is we're going to call this something happened, because no one denies it. But Bonnie's in a bit of a bad situation now, because she's outside of the Frontier Dome and can't get back in. Hence why Old Man Apple, Atlas, Sanji, and also Frankie are now heading down to rescue her. And Dad, look, am I the only one who thinks that this is a terrible idea? I mean, sure, I understand Stella's feelings, but he is jeopardizing the entire mission that Stussy got fingered for. I guess our saving grace here is Sanji, and look, Frankie's coming along, he might be important as well. I can't help but feel like this is an opening for tragedy though. For Stella or Atlas, maybe both. Because I have no doubt that we'll save Bonnie, but I expect that to come at a cost. So I suppose what this does do is it gives some great potential for a Kuma entrance, by which I mean the real Kuma, because at the moment none of the crew can really help Bonnie. So if she finds herself in a desperate situation, then it really is up to Dad to save the day.
This nigga smart as shit, because that's exactly what happened.
Although now that the Mark III pacifista are back on our side, the situation is more like Bonnie and her army of robot dads versus the Marines, which may actually trigger Bonnie if she sees the Marines attacking the pacifista. However, this is unlikely to last long due to Saint Saturn, because I think that we all see what's about to happen here. The way the command structure works, I mean, it's a bit vague with what happened, but basically Kizaru beat Sentomaru, and then I believe he used Sentomaru's authority chip to command the pacifista. Some people have said that it might have been Kizaru's own chip. I don't know about that. Pretty sure it was Sentomaru's. But then, or I guess now, Atlas as a Vegapunk has a higher authority tier and has reversed that command. But Saturn still exists to reverse that reversal. And I think it's going to be quite shocking for all involved because very few people know that Saint Saturn is even here. Even amongst the Marines, it's been kept secret. But Saturn has to act here. Otherwise, the Marines are going to take insane and very preventable losses. Which is another cliffhanger that may or may not be addressed in the next chapter. A very classic Oda maneuver. To set up a series of cliffhangers one after the other, like the Iron Giant. That was a huge moment in the last chapter and it isn't touched on at all here. To be fair, it's been asleep for hundreds and hundreds of years, so it must have one hell of a morning routine to complete before it can truly begin its day of destruction. But you let me know in the comments, what are you more excited?
Chat, shout out to this nigga, because he literally covered a lot of points even if he didn't know what points he was covering because it was a little bit earlier. But nigga, he did cover them. So W's in the chat. I'm going to take a quick piss again. I'm sorry. And then after this, we are going to get to recording. I ain't gonna lie.
She say you so true. Baby girl, I already know. How did this shit when I'm on? Damn is what I know. Mixing a drink, make a potion. It might just put me on the floor. Mixing a drink with Patron. Can't do this shit on my own. Looking to change my tone. What you gonna do when I leave and I'm gone?